The red warning lights flashed across the bridge of the massive warship Harmony's edge. Admiral Kethvar stared at the holographic display showing 17 dead worlds. Each red dot represented billions of lives lost to the Vextar swarm. His forearms trembled as he counted the losses again, hoping the numbers would somehow change. "Sir, we lost contact with the Kepler Defense Fleet," reported his communications officer. The young Altarian's voice cracked with fear. "That's 3 more systems in just 2 days." Kethvar closed his eyes. In his 300 years of military service, he had never seen anything like the Vextar. They appeared from deep space like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Their bioships grew stronger with each world they devoured. Traditional weapons barely scratched their living hulls. Around the conference table sat the last hope of civilized space, representatives from 12 different species, each one representing thousands of years of culture and wisdom. The Centharians, with their flowing robes and peaceful philosophy. The Zephyrians with their crystal-like bodies that sparkled even in the dim emergency lighting. The Drakmor with their massive frames and warrior traditions. All of them looked defeated. "We need new options," Kethvar said, his voice heavy with desperation. "Our current strategies are not working." Commander Velnara of the Centharian Peace Corps spoke first. "Perhaps we could negotiate. Every species can be reasoned with." "The Vextar do not negotiate," growled General Thrak of the Drakmor. "They consume. They adapt. They multiply. I have fought them for 6 months. Every weapon we use, they learn to counter within days." "What about the quantum disruptors?" asked Dr. Silex, the Zephyrian scientist. "We could modify the frequency patterns." Thrak's laugh was bitter. "We tried 17 different frequencies. They absorbed the energy and used it to grow bigger ships." The room fell silent. These were the greatest military minds in the galaxy, and they were out of ideas. The Vextar had appeared 3 months ago, and already they controlled a quarter of Coalition space. At this rate, the entire galaxy would be consumed within a year. "There is one option we haven't discussed," Kethvar said slowly. Every head turned toward him. "The humans." The reaction was immediate. Several species began talking at once, their voices rising in protest. "The humans are barely civilized," said Velnara. "They still use kinetic weapons. They refuse to follow any galactic protocols," added Dr. Silex. "Their first contact reports show complete disregard for diplomatic standards." General Thrak slammed his massive fist on the table. "They are warmongers. They have been fighting each other for their entire recorded history." Kethvar raised all 4 of his arms for silence. "That is exactly why we need them." He activated the display, showing human military records. "Look at their history. They do not fight like us. They do not follow our rules. When facing impossible odds, they find ways to win that make no sense." The display showed human conflicts throughout their history. Ancient battles where small forces defeated massive armies through trickery and surprise. Modern wars where outnumbered, defenders held positions that should have fallen in hours. "They are unpredictable," Kethvar continued. "The Vextar adapt by studying our tactics and finding counters. But how do you counter something that makes no logical sense?" "You're suggesting we ally with barbarians," Velnara said with disgust. "I'm suggesting we ally with survivors," Kethvar replied. "Every other species in this room follows the same basic military principles. Honor, logic, efficiency. The Vextar have learned to predict and counter all of these. The humans follow none of these principles. Dr. Silex brought up human battle recordings. Their tactics are chaotic. Look at this. The display showed human ships moving in seemingly random patterns. No formation discipline, no coordinated fire patterns. It's like they're making it up as they go along. And yet they win, Kethvar pointed out. Their survival rate in impossible situations is higher than any other known species. General Thrak studied the recordings more carefully. They use weapons we abandoned thousands of years ago. Chemical explosives, metal projectiles, crude fusion bombs. Weapons the Vextar have never encountered, Kethvar said. Weapons they cannot easily adapt to because they are too simple. The debate continued for hours. Some species refused to consider working with humans. Others worried about what would happen if humans gained access to advanced galactic technology. But as more reports came in of Vextar victories, the options grew smaller. Finally, Kethvar called for a vote. All in favor of requesting human assistance? 7 hands, claws, and tentacles rose. Opposed? 4. The motion carries. The message was sent through the quantum communication network to Earth. It took 3 days to reach the Sol system, traveling faster than light through dimensions that human science barely understood. Li Tae-ho was eating dinner with his family when the priority alert came through his communicator. As commander of the Earth Defense Force, he was used to emergency calls. But this one was different. The message came from outside human space, from species that had never acknowledged Earth's existence. He read the transmission twice, then called his wife into the room. "Honey, I need to go to work." "At this time of night?" she asked, looking at their young children playing on the floor. "There's a war out there," Lee said, pointing toward the stars visible through their apartment window. "And apparently, they need our help." 2 hours later, Lee stood in the command center of Luna Station, Earth's primary military facility. Around him, the best and brightest of human military intelligence worked to understand what they were facing. Captain Kim Soo-jin finished reading the Coalition's tactical reports and looked up with a frown. "Sir, according to this data, the enemy adapts to everything. They study attack patterns and develop counters within days." "What's your assessment?" Lee asked. "They're fighting a smart enemy like it's a dumb enemy," Soo-jin replied. "All their tactics assume the Vextar will keep making the same mistakes, but the Vextar learn from every encounter." Lee studied the holographic display showing Coalition fleet movements. Every battle followed the same pattern: careful formations, coordinated attacks, orderly retreats when things went wrong. It was textbook military strategy, perfect for fighting. "Other civilized species, they fight like gentlemen," Lee said with a smile that worried his staff. "Clean, honorable, predictable." "Sir?" Soo-jin asked. "Captain? How do you fight an enemy that learns from every mistake you make?" Soo-jin thought for a moment. "You don't make mistakes, sir?" "Wrong," Lee said, his smile growing wider. "You make so many mistakes that they can't figure out which ones are real mistakes and which ones are on purpose." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Lieutenant Nam Da-eun, the intelligence officer, spoke up first. "Sir, are you suggesting we fight badly on purpose?" "I'm suggesting we fight like humans," Lee replied. "The Coalition wants us to be their last resort. Let's show them why that's the best place for us to be." Within 6 hours, the first human fleet was ready to depart. 12 ships, each one modified with weapons and equipment that would make Coalition engineers cry. They carried soldiers who had grown up on a world where warfare was an art form, where the only rule was that there were no rules. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Lee sent one final message to Earth Command. "We're heading into the unknown to fight an enemy that destroys everything it touches. The galaxy's greatest civilizations couldn't stop them. They're calling us because they're desperate and have no other choice. I think we're going to like it out there." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler 442, and Admiral Kethvar immediately knew something was wrong. The ships were smaller than expected, covered in strange modifications that made no engineering sense. Weapon systems stuck, out at odd angles. Hull plates were different colors, as if each ship had been repaired with whatever materials were available. "Sir, the human flagship is requesting permission to dock," his communications officer reported. Kethvar straightened his uniform and checked his translator. This would be first contact between his people and humanity. Everything had to go perfectly. "Grant permission. Have honor guards ready to receive them." But when the airlock opened, only 3 humans walked through. No ceremonial robes, no diplomatic entourage. The man in front wore a simple gray uniform with burn marks on the sleeves. He carried a small metal weapon that he was taking apart and cleaning while walking. "Admiral Kethvar?" the human asked, not bothering to salute. "I'm Colonel Park Jin-woo. These are my people, Lieutenant Nam Da-un and Captain Kim Soo-jin." Kethvar tried not to stare at the primitive weapon. "Colonel, welcome to the Coalition Fleet. We have prepared detailed briefings on enemy capabilities and proper military protocols." Park nodded while reassembling his weapon with practiced ease. "Good. Show me what you've got." The briefing room was filled with Coalition officers from 12 different species. Holographic displays showed Vextar fleet movements, bioship capabilities, and tactical analysis from dozens of battles. Kethvar had spent weeks preparing this presentation. "The Vextar operate as a hive mind," he began, pointing to the display. "Each ship is controlled by a central intelligence that adapts to our tactics. They use biological weapons that grow stronger after each encounter." Park interrupted. "How do they get supplies?" "Supplies?" Kethvar blinked in confusion. "Food, fuel, materials. Where do they get them?" "They consume planets," Kethvar said slowly. "They break down matter into usable resources. So they need to keep eating," Park said, making notes. "What about communication? How do the ships talk?" "To each other." "Through biological neural networks that span across space," Dr. Silex answered. "The connections are instantaneous and cannot be jammed." Lieutenant Nam Da-un leaned forward. "Cannot be jammed? Or you haven't figured out how to jam them yet?" The Coalition officers exchanged glances. "We have tried electromagnetic disruption, quantum interference, and psychic barriers," Dr. Silex said stiffly. "Nothing works." "Have you tried loud music?" Nam asked seriously. The room fell silent. General Thrax's face turned a darker shade of red. "This is not a joke, human." "I'm not joking," Nam replied. "Biological systems can be disrupted by unexpected inputs. If their network evolved for efficient communication, random noise might cause problems." Captain Kim Soo-jin studied the tactical displays. "Your battle plans are very organized." "Of course they are organized," Kethvar said proudly. "We follow proper military doctrine. Coordinated attacks, mutual support, strategic retreats when necessary. And the Vextar know this," Kim observed. "They can predict what you'll do next because you always do the smart thing." "What would you suggest instead?" asked Commander Velnara with barely concealed disdain. Kim smiled. "The dumb thing." Before anyone could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the ship. Red lights flashed as the bridge crew reported massive Vextar ships dropping out of hyperspace. Dozens of bioships, each one the size of a small moon, surrounded the Coalition fleet. "Battle stations," Kethvar ordered. "Execute Defensive Formation 7 Alpha." The Coalition ships moved into a perfect defensive sphere, weapons charged and ready. It was a textbook response to superior numbers, designed to maximize firepower, while protecting weaker vessels. Park watched the formation take shape and shook his head. "This won't work." "It is the optimal defensive configuration," Kethvar said stiffly. "For fighting other civilized species, sure," Park agreed. "But these things aren't civilized. They're going to surround you, adapt to your weapons, and pick you apart piece by piece." "Then what do you suggest?" Park activated his communicator. "All human ships, this is wildcard actual. Forget the battle plan. Weapons free. Make it messy." The human ships suddenly scattered in all directions, moving, in patterns that hurt to look at. Some flew straight up, others dove down. One ship started spinning while firing its weapons in random directions. "What are they doing?" demanded General Thrak. "Surviving," Park said calmly. The Vextar bioships moved to intercept the Coalition formation, just as they had in dozens of previous battles. But the human ships weren't where they were supposed to be. They were everywhere and nowhere, firing at targets that made no sense. One human destroyer flew directly at a massive Vextar cruiser, firing primitive kinetic rounds that bounced off the bioship's hull. The Vextar ignored it, focusing on the main Coalition fleet. But then the human ship rammed into the cruiser's side and exploded, tearing a huge hole in the living hull. "They sacrificed themselves," whispered Velnara in shock. "No," Nam said, checking her instruments. "They ejected in escape pods 30 seconds before impact. The explosion was just their reactor overloading. Another human ship was spinning wildly while broadcasting what sounded like music mixed with random noise. 3 Vextar fighters moved to destroy it, but their formation broke apart as the bioships began moving erratically." "The neural network," Dr. Silik said in amazement. "The random signals are disrupting their coordination." A human boarding pod smashed into the side of a Vextar command ship. Instead of targeting the bridge or weapon systems, the human Marines ran toward what looked like storage areas, shouting and playing more of that horrible music. Captain Kim Soo-jin's ship was flying backwards while shooting at a Vextar fighter, but every time the enemy adapted to her weapon frequency, she switched to a completely different type of gun. Lasers, plasma, kinetic rounds, even primitive chemical explosives. "They're not following any tactical doctrine," Kethvar said, watching in fascination and horror. "That's the point," Park replied. "The Vextar adapt by learning patterns. But there's no pattern to learn." A human cruiser was running away from 6 Vextar ships, leading them on a wild chase through the asteroid field. But it wasn't really running away. Every few minutes it would turn around and fire a single shot at the pursuers before running again. The Vextar kept following, expecting a proper battle that never came. "This is chaos," General Thrak said. "This is war," Park corrected. "Your way is fighting. Our way is winning." The Vextar fleet, designed to counter organized resistance, found itself facing something it had never encountered before. Enemies that didn't coordinate, weapons that changed constantly, tactics that made no sense, ships that fought like they were commanded by madmen. For the first time in months, Vextar bioships began withdrawing from a battle. They couldn't adapt to chaos because chaos had no pattern to study. As the alien fleet retreated, the Coalition, Forces stared at the humans in a mixture of awe and terror. They had just watched 12 primitive ships drive off a force that should have destroyed them easily. How? Was all Kethvar could manage to say. Park finished cleaning his weapon again and holstered it. Admiral, you've been fighting them like they're people. They're not people. They're a machine, and machines break when you hit them with something they're not designed to handle. And what's that? Park smiled, and somehow his expression was more frightening than any alien weapon. Human stupidity. We've been perfecting it for thousands of years. Captain Yoon Hai-wan gripped the controls of her destroyer Stubborn Fool as another wave of Vexitar bioships dropped out of hyperspace. Her crew was a mix of Earth veterans and Coalition volunteers who had learned to fight the human way. The learning process had been painful for everyone involved. "Ma'am, enemy formation is moving into standard attack pattern," reported her Altarian tactical officer, trying to sound professional despite his forearms shaking with nervousness. "Good," Yoon said, checking her weapons systems. "That means they're thinking like civilized beings. Let's disappoint them." She keyed her communicator. "All ships, this is Chaos Leader. Remember the rules. There are no rules. If you're doing something that makes sense, you're doing it wrong." The human destroyer squadrons scattered across space, like seeds in the wind. Stubborn Fool flew upside down while firing its main guns at empty space. Lucky Break spun in circles while launching decoy drones that played children's songs. Bad Idea flew straight toward the largest Vextar ship while its crew took turns shouting random words into the communication channels. The Coalition officers watching from their command ships couldn't understand what they were seeing. This wasn't warfare. This was madness, but the madness was working. Sergeant Cho Min-ho led the first boarding party against a Vextar biocruiser. His team of 12 Marines carried equipment that would make any sane military officer cry: portable speakers, bags of glitter, and explosives attached to kitchen timers instead of proper detonators. "Remember the plan," Cho told his team as their boarding pod smashed through the bioship's hull. "We're not here to destroy critical systems. We're here to give this thing the worst day of its life." The inside of the Vextar ship looked like someone had grown a building instead of building it. Walls curved and twisted in organic patterns. The air was thick and humid, filled with strange smells that made humans want to sneeze. "Team Alpha, find something that looks important and ignore it," Cho ordered. "Team Bravo, find something that looks useless and blow it up. Team Charlie, just start making noise." The Marines spread through the bioship, following orders that violated every rule of military combat. They planted explosives in janitor closets and bathrooms. They covered walls with graffiti written in bright pink spray paint. One Marine found what looked like a cafeteria and started rearranging the furniture. But the strangest thing was the music. Team Charlie had brought portable speakers and was playing a mix of death metal, children's lullabies, and something called K-pop at maximum volume. The sound echoed through the organic corridors, and the ship itself began to vibrate in response. "Sir, the bio-neural network is showing stress patterns," reported one of the Marines with a scanner. "I think we're giving it a headache." Meanwhile, Commander Lim Yu-jin was fighting a completely different kind of war from her information warfare station aboard the command ship Reasonable Doubt. While the Marines caused physical chaos, her job was to create mental chaos. "Broadcasting on all Vextar frequencies," she told her team of human and alien technicians. "Remember, we want to confuse them, not communicate with them." Her broadcasts were masterpieces of misinformation, fake retreat orders mixed with recipe, Instructions: mathematical equations that started correctly but ended with song lyrics. Random numbers that meant nothing but sounded important. The Vextar hive mind, evolved for perfect communication and coordination, found itself receiving signals that made no sense. Ship A would receive orders to attack position X, while Ship B got the same message telling it to attack position Y. Ship C would get half the message in Altarian and half in Ancient Earth Latin. For a species that had never encountered lies or misinformation, this was like being poisoned. The hive mind began to doubt its own senses, spending processing power to verify information instead of controlling its ships. "They're slowing down," observed Dr. Silix from the Coalition command ship. "Their reaction times are increasing." "Information overload," Lim explained. "They're used to perfect data. We're giving them imperfect data, and they don't know how to handle it." The space battle was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed random but somehow worked. When the Vextar adapted to energy weapons, Captain Song Yunbi switched to kinetic rounds. When they developed armor against kinetic rounds, Lieutenant Zhang Ho-seok started, firing chunks of ice. When they adapted to ice, he began launching crates of expired food. "What is the tactical purpose of throwing garbage at them?" asked General Thrak, watching a human cruiser launch what appeared to be old furniture into space. "Confusion," Park replied from his position on the Coalition flagship. "Every time they adapt to one weapon, we switch to something else. Eventually, they have to carry defenses against everything we've ever used, which makes their ships slower and less efficient. But furniture is not a weapon. It is when it hits you at 3,000 kilometers per hour, Park said with a smile. Besides, they don't know it's furniture. For all they know, it's some advanced human weapon they haven't figured out yet. The Vextar bioships were indeed trying to analyze the furniture weapons. Billions of processing cycles were dedicated to understanding the tactical significance of dining room chairs and coffee tables. The hive mind created detailed threat assessments for sofas and developed countermeasures against lamp attacks. Captain Ryu Sung-min discovered that damaged human ships fought better than undamaged ones. When his destroyer Happy Accident lost its main engine, he used the explosion to propel his ship in unexpected directions. The Vextar had learned to predict ship movements based on engine capabilities, but a ship moving through controlled explosions was impossible to predict. "Engine 3 is completely destroyed, sir," his engineer reported. "Perfect," Sung-min replied. "Blow up Engine 2 as well. I want to fly this thing like a brick with attitude problems." The Coalition forces began to understand that humans didn't just break rules. They rewrote them constantly. Every time the Vextar developed a counter to human tactics, humans would abandon those tactics and try something else. Dr. Bae So-young, the expedition's xenobiologist, had been studying captured Vextar samples. She developed something she called confusion spores, biological agents designed not to kill, but to scramble neural signals. "Traditional biological weapons try to destroy the target," she explained to the fascinated Coalition scientists. "Mine try to annoy it to death." Her spores caused Vextar drones to receive garbled instructions. Ships that were ordered to attack forward instead turned left. Fighters commanded to fire on enemies began shooting at their own support vessels. Biocruisers trying to coordinate attacks ended up flying into each other. The battle turned into a nightmare for the Vextar. They were fighting an enemy that refused to be logical. Every adaptation they made became useless within minutes. Every pattern they learned was immediately abandoned. Lieutenant General Shin Myung-ho watched the chaos from his command post and smiled. They're trying to learn our unpredictability, he told his staff. But that's like trying to learn how to be random. The harder they try, the more predictable they become. He was right. The Vextar hive mind, desperate to counter human tactics, began making random decisions that followed mathematical patterns. Shin fed false data into their communications network, making them think certain random behaviors were more effective than others. Soon, Vextar ships were making random moves that weren't random at all. They were following algorithms designed to simulate chaos, which made them more predictable than traditional military formations. "Sir, the enemy fleet is retreating," reported the Coalition's sensor officer, his voice filled with amazement. Admiral Kethvar stared at the display showing Vextar bioships fleeing the battlefield. In 3 months of warfare, he had never seen them retreat. They either won or died trying. "How many ships did we lose?" he asked. 17 Coalition vessels destroyed or heavily damaged, came the reply. "Human losses. 3 ships destroyed, but all crew members evacuated successfully." Kethvar turned to Colonel Park, who was calmly eating something that looked like a sandwich while watching the retreat. "How is this possible?" Park swallowed his food before answering. "Admiral, your people fight wars to win. We fight wars to survive. There's a difference." "I don't understand." "Winning means being better than your enemy," Park explained. "Surviving means being too troublesome to kill. We've spent our entire history being outnumbered and outgunned. We learned to be more trouble than we're worth." As the Vextar fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying news of their first major defeat, the galaxy began to realize that the rules of warfare had just changed forever. 3 weeks after the first human victory, Captain Ryu Sung-min found himself teaching flying lessons to a squadron of Altarian pilots who kept trying to fly correctly. The problem was that correct flying made them predictable, and predictable meant dead when facing the Vextar. "No, no, no," Sung-min said over the radio as he watched the alien pilots form perfect attack formations. "You're thinking too much. Stop being smart." "But, sir," replied Squadron Leader Vexhan, his forearms working the controls with textbook precision, "this is the optimal attack pattern for our ship configuration." "The Vextar know optimal," Sung-min explained patiently. "They've been studying optimal for 3 months. Do something suboptimal. Do something stupid. Do something that makes you want to apologize to your flight instructors." The Altarian pilots struggled with the concept. Their entire military tradition was built on discipline, efficiency, and doing things the right way. The idea of deliberately doing things wrong went against millions of years of evolution. But when Vextan tried flying his fighter with one engine deliberately misfiring, something magical happened. The ship moved in jerky, unpredictable patterns. That made Vextar targeting systems guess wrong. When he fired his weapons while spinning out of control, he actually hit more targets than when he was flying properly. "This feels wrong," Vexhan complained as his damaged ship somehow outmaneuvered 3 Vextar fighters. "Good," Sung-min replied. "If it feels right, you're doing it wrong." Dr. Bae So-young had been busy in her laboratory, developing new ways to confuse rather than kill. Her latest creation was a virus designed specifically for biological computer systems. Instead of destroying the Vextar neural network, it made the network ask stupid questions. "Traditional computer viruses try to crash the system," she explained, to a group of fascinated Coalition scientists. "Mine makes the system annoying to use." Her virus caused Vextar ships to constantly request confirmation for simple actions. Bio-cruisers would ask their hive mind 3 times if they were really sure they wanted to turn left. Fighters would stop in the middle of battles to verify their target identification. Command ships would spend hours trying to confirm that space was, in fact, a vacuum. The Vextar hive mind, which had never encountered software bugs before, began dedicating enormous processing power to answering its own questions. Critical military functions slowed down as the collective intelligence got trapped in loops of self-doubt. Meanwhile, Lieutenant General Shin Myung-ho was revolutionizing the concept of military intelligence. Instead of gathering accurate information about the enemy, his teams were feeding the Vextar accurate information about human forces, information that was completely useless. We're telling them exactly where our ships are, what weapons we carry, and our current mission objectives, he explained to puzzled coalition officers. The catch is, none of it matters, because we change our plans every 30 minutes. His intelligence. Teams would broadcast detailed human fleet positions, knowing that by the time the Vextar received the information and planned a response, the human ships would be somewhere else doing something completely different. The hive mind wasted enormous resources analyzing obsolete data while trying to predict enemy movements that had already changed. The breakthrough came when Major Lee Ju-yan captured a Vextar command node alive. Instead of interrogating it, for strategic information like any normal intelligence officer would, she decided to teach it poker. The key to understanding humans, she told the confused bioconstruct, is learning that we lie for fun. The command node, connected to the hive mind through quantum neural links, tried to process the concept of bluffing. For a species that shared all thoughts and never deceived each other, the idea that someone might pretend to have good cards when they had bad cards was literally incomprehensible. But why would you claim to have superior resources when you do not? The node asked, through a translation device. Because sometimes pretending you're strong when you're weak makes you actually strong, Ju-yan replied, raising her bet with a pair of threes. The hive mind dedicated processing power to understanding this paradox. How could weakness become strength through deception? How could false information change reality? The collective intelligence that had conquered dozens of star systems began experiencing something it had never felt before: doubt about its own perceptions. Commander Wang, Ji-hoon established the first human warfare academy on a coalition space station. His students were volunteers from various species who wanted to learn how to think sideways, as humans called it. The curriculum was unlike any military school in galactic history. Students learned to use their weaknesses as weapons. They practiced failing successfully. They studied the art of strategic confusion and tactical chaos. Today we're going to practice being wrong on purpose, Wang announced to a class of mixed species. The goal is to make mistakes that help you win. A young Centharian officer raised her hand. But, sir, making mistakes leads to defeat. Only if your enemy expects you to be right, Wang replied. If they expect you to be wrong, then being wrong is actually right. The class stared at him in confusion, which was exactly what Wang wanted. If his own students couldn't predict what he was teaching, how could the enemy predict what they would do? The coalition military academies scrambled to document these new strategies, but human officers warned against the dangers of turning chaos into doctrine. The moment you make rules about rule-breaking, you've stopped breaking rules, explained General Moon Yun-woo during a lecture to coalition military leaders. Write down everything we do and it stops working because now it's predictable. Then how do we train our forces? Asked Admiral Kethvar. You don't train them, Moon replied. You untrain them. Take everything they think they know about warfare and make them forget it. Then teach them to trust their instincts instead of their textbooks. The results were remarkable. Coalition forces that learned to fight like humans began winning battles. That should have been impossible. The key wasn't superior technology or numbers. It was the willingness to do things that made no sense to anyone, including themselves. Captain Oyejin discovered that the Vextar were trying to create mathematical models of human behavior. Their hive mind had collected data from hundreds of battles and was attempting to find patterns in human chaos. "They're trying to solve us like an equation," she reported to the human command staff. "They think there's a secret formula behind our tactics." "Is there?" asked Colonel Park. "Of course not," O replied. "But they don't know that. They keep looking for patterns that don't exist, which means they're not paying attention to what we're actually doing." She began deliberately creating false patterns in human ship movements. For 3 battles, human forces would follow certain formations that looked random but actually followed mathematical sequences. The Vextar would detect these patterns and prepare countermeasures. Then, in the 4th battle, O would abandon the patterns completely and do something genuinely random. The Vextar, expecting the mathematical sequence to continue, would deploy countermeasures for attacks that never came while leaving themselves vulnerable to attacks they hadn't anticipated. The war was becoming a contest between chaos and order, unpredictability and adaptation. The Vextar hive mind, which had evolved over millions of years to be the perfect learning machine, found itself trying to learn from teachers who were deliberately teaching wrong lessons. Commodore An Tae-young summed up the human approach during a strategy meeting with coalition leaders. "We're not trying to outthink them. We're trying to out-confuse them. Every time they think they understand us, we change the rules. Every time they adapt to our tactics, we abandon those tactics and try something else." "But how long can this strategy work?" asked Dr. Silix. "Eventually, they will adapt to your unpredictability," An smiled. "Doctor, we've been unpredictable for our entire evolutionary history. We're not just good at chaos, we're addicted to it. The Vextar are trying to out-chaos a species that invented chaos as an art form." As news of human victories spread throughout Coalition space, something unprecedented began happening. Species that had followed the same military doctrines for thousands of years started questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare. The galaxy was learning that sometimes the most advanced strategy was to have no strategy at all. 6 months after humanity's first intervention, Fleet Admiral Kim Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the Coalition supercarrier New Harmony, watching the strangest military formation in galactic history. His task force included ships from 17 different species, all flying in patterns that would have made their ancestors weep. An Altarian cruiser flew upside down while broadcasting cooking recipes. A Syntherian peace vessel had been converted into a psychological warfare platform that played children's songs mixed with industrial noise. 3 Drakmor battleships were flying in formation while their crews took turns making faces at the enemy through the viewports. "Sir, Vextar fleet detected on long-range sensors," reported his tactical officer, a young Zephyrian who had learned to read sensor data while standing on her head. "How many?" Kim asked, not looking away from his own sensors that he was deliberately reading incorrectly. "Approximately 400 bioships, sir. Standard hive mind formation." Kim smiled. Standard formation meant predictable formation. After months of fighting humans, the Vextar had tried to return to their original tactics, hoping that old methods would work against this new coalition force. "Signal all ships," Kim ordered. "Execute Plan Ridiculous." There was no Plan Ridiculous in any military manual. That was the point. Kim had learned that the best battle plans were the ones that didn't exist until the moment you needed them. The coalition fleet scattered in 12 different directions, each group following tactics from different species that had been modified by human advisors. The result was military chaos that somehow worked better than military order. Captain Oyejin's research team had made a disturbing discovery. The Vextar were evolving new biological forms specifically designed to counter human unpredictability. Some bioships now had neural networks that could process multiple contradictory thoughts simultaneously. Others had grown random behavior generators to try matching human chaos. "Sir, we're seeing new Vextar variants," she reported from her science vessel, Reasonable Assumption. "They're trying to out-weird us." "Show me," Kim requested. The tactical display revealed Vextar bioships moving in patterns that looked almost human. They were flying erratically, firing at random targets, and broadcasting nonsensical messages on communication channels. "They're learning," observed Commander Lim Yu-jin from the Information Warfare Station. "But they're learning wrong." The Vextar attempt to mimic human chaos was like watching someone try to speak a language they had only heard once. The bioships moved randomly, but their randomness followed mathematical patterns. They fired at unpredictable targets, but their unpredictability was itself predictable. "They think chaos is just order with different rules," Kim realized. "They don't understand that real chaos has no rules at all." Commodore An Tae-young was leading the assault on what intelligence believed was a major Vextar staging area. But instead of targeting military installations, his forces were attacking seemingly random locations throughout the system while broadcasting the strangest collection of signals in galactic history. "Teams Alpha through Delta, begin cultural bombardment," he ordered. Thousands of human entertainment programs began flooding Vextar communication networks, pop music from 12 different Earth cultures, comedy shows where the jokes made no sense when translated, social media posts about cats doing amusing things, reality TV programs where people competed in activities that served no purpose. The Vextar hive mind, attempting to understand these transmissions, began dedicating processing power to analyzing the tactical significance of dance trends and celebrity gossip. What was the military purpose of videos showing humans falling down in humorous ways? Were the cat pictures some form of coded intelligence? Critical military functions began failing as the swarm's collective intelligence became obsessed with trying to decode the meaning behind something called the dress, and whether it was blue and black or white and gold. "Sir, enemy response time is dropping significantly," reported his intelligence officer. "They're spending too much computational power trying to understand our cultural exports." Meanwhile, Master Sergeant Park Sora had discovered something fascinating about Vextar adaptation protocols. The hive mind was creating detailed behavioral models of every human tactic, storing countermeasures for future use. "They're building a library of how to fight us," she explained to her special operations team. "Every weird thing we do, they document and prepare for next time." Park's solution was brilliantly simple. She began deliberately establishing patterns, letting the Vextar adapt to them, then switching to completely different approaches that used the enemy's preparations against them. For 3 battles, Marines used the same boarding tactics. The Vextar developed perfect countermeasures, reinforcing their ships against those specific human strategies. Then, in the 4th battle, Park's teams did exactly what the Vextar expected, but they did it badly on purpose. The bioships had prepared for expertly executed human boarding actions. They were not prepared for incompetently executed boarding actions that succeeded through sheer stubbornness rather than skill. "Ma'am, the enemy has sealed all the access routes we used last time," reported one of her sergeants as they're boarding. Pod attached to a Vextar cruiser. Good, Park replied, pulling out a cutting torch. Then we'll make new access routes. In fact, let's make too many access routes. Let's put doors everywhere. Her team began cutting random holes throughout the bioship's hull, not to enter the ship, but to confuse its repair systems. The Vextar had evolved to seal breaches efficiently, but they couldn't handle dozens of simultaneous breaches in locations. That made no tactical sense. General Moon Hyun-woo had established training centers throughout Coalition space where alien officers could learn what humans called adaptive warfare philosophy. The courses had names like Strategic Thinking for Beginners and How to Win by Losing Correctly. Traditional military education teaches you to do things right, he explained to a class of mixed species officers. We're going to teach you to do things wrong in ways that work. The students struggled with concepts that humans found natural. How do you plan for situations you can't predict? How do you prepare for enemies who change their tactics constantly? How do you win battles by refusing to fight them properly? The key, Moon continued, is to remember that the enemy is also trying to predict what you'll do. If you do what makes sense, they'll be ready for you. If you do what makes no sense, they won't know how to respond. A Centharian officer raised her hand. But, sir, what if our nonsensical actions fail? Then you do different nonsensical actions, Moon replied. The beauty of chaos is that there's always more chaos available. The training was working. Coalition forces that had learned to fight like humans were achieving victory ratios that seemed impossible. Ships were surviving battles they should have lost. Soldiers were completing missions that military textbooks said were suicide. But the most remarkable change was happening to the Vextar themselves. Dr. Bae So-young's biological analysis revealed that prolonged exposure to human tactics was causing evolutionary changes in the hive mind structure. They're developing individual personalities, she reported during a science briefing. The collective consciousness is fragmenting as different bioships try different approaches to counter us. Is that good or bad? Asked Admiral Kethavar. It's unprecedented, Bae replied. A hive mind species is becoming individualistic. They're literally evolving in real time to try to match our unpredictability. Some Vextar bioships were beginning to act independently, making decisions without consulting the collective. Others were developing what could only be described as neuroses, obsessing over specific human tactics while ignoring obvious threats. Commander Wang Ji-hoon observed these changes from his position aboard the tactical analysis vessel, Educated. Guess. They're trying to become like us, he told his staff. But they don't understand that being human isn't something you can learn from a textbook. The war was transforming both sides. Humans were teaching the galaxy new ways to fight, while the Vextar were learning that perfect adaptation could be a weakness when facing enemies who refused to be perfect. As the Coalition fleet prepared for what intelligence suggested would be the final assault on Vextar core territory, Kim Do-hyun reflected on how much had changed since that first desperate message from Admiral Kethavar. Sir, all ships report ready for the final offensive, his communications officer announced. Kim nodded, but he wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about what came after. The galaxy had asked humans to help win a war, but humans had done something more dangerous. They had taught the galaxy to question the rules that had governed civilized space for millions of years. The Vextar might surrender soon, but the revolution in military thinking would continue long after the last. Bioship was defeated. The galaxy would never be the same, and Kim wasn't sure if that was entirely a good thing. Sometimes winning meant changing everything, even the things you didn't want to change. The end of the war came not with a massive battle, but with silence. Admiral Kang Soo-jin stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship Last Hope, staring at sensor readings that made no sense. The Vextar fleet had simply stopped. "Ma'am, all enemy vessels have ceased movement," reported her sensor operator, a Drakmor who had learned to read displays while eating sandwiches. "They're not attacking, not retreating, not responding to our communications." "Are they dead?" asked Colonel Park, still cleaning that same primitive weapon he had been working on for 8 months. "No, sir," came the reply. "They're alive, but they're not connected anymore. Each bioship is operating independently." Dr. Bae So-young's science teams had been monitoring Vexitar biological patterns for weeks, watching something unprecedented happen to the hive mind. The collective consciousness that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was breaking apart. "The neural network is fragmenting," she reported. "Individual bioships are developing separate thought patterns. The hive mind is becoming thousands of individual minds." "Is this what we wanted?" asked Admiral Kethvar, his 4 arms working nervously at his controls. "I don't think it matters what we wanted," Kang replied. "This is what we got." The first Vextar surrender came from a biofighter whose pilot, the word pilot, felt strange when applied to a creature that had never been an individual before, transmitted a simple message. "We don't understand anymore. We can't fight what makes no sense. We give up." More surrenders followed. Bioships that had been parts of a collective intelligence for their entire existence were suddenly alone with their own thoughts. Many of them were completely overwhelmed by the experience of individual consciousness. Commander Lee Soo-ho led the first diplomatic mission to communicate with the fragmented Vextar. What they found challenged every assumption about the species that had once seemed unstoppable. "They're not evil," he reported back to Coalition Command. "They were never evil. They were just efficient. The hive mind was designed to find optimal solutions to survival problems. Consuming planets and destroying other species was simply the most efficient approach to resource gathering. But efficiency required predictable enemies following logical patterns. When faced with humans who refused to be logical, the hive mind had tried to adapt by becoming illogical itself. The attempt had shattered its fundamental programming. Individual Vextar are actually quite reasonable," Lee continued. "They're just terrified and confused. Imagine spending your entire existence as part of a collective consciousness, then suddenly being alone with your own thoughts." The integration process was unlike anything in galactic history. Admiral Kang found herself overseeing refugee camps filled with former bioweapons who were learning how to be people. Many ex-Vextar became fascinated with philosophy, trying to understand the concept of individual existence. Others developed an appreciation for humor, having been exposed to so much human comedy during the psychological warfare campaigns. Vextar. Comedy clubs became popular throughout Coalition space, though their jokes were often incomprehensible to other species. "Why did the bioship cross the stellar nexus?" asked one former drone during his first stand-up performance. "Why?" responded the audience, mostly out of politeness. "Because it finally could choose where to go," came the answer, which sent the ex-Vextar crowd into hysterics while leaving everyone else confused. The Galactic Defense Coalition underwent massive restructuring. The old military academies threw out textbooks that had been used for thousands of years, replacing them with courses that had no fixed curriculum. Colonel Hwang Mi-young became the first human appointed to Coalition High Command, despite her tendency to solve strategic problems by asking, "What's the stupidest possible approach to this situation?" and then finding ways to make it work. The key to modern warfare, she explained to new recruits, is accepting that there are no keys. The moment you think you understand how to fight, you've lost the ability to fight effectively. Her promotion ceremony was held in a conference room where all the furniture had been arranged incorrectly on purpose. The chairs faced away from the podium, the tables were upside down, and the refreshments were served in containers designed for other foods. It was chaotic and uncomfortable, which was exactly the point. "Comfortable soldiers are predictable soldiers," Huang told the assembled officers. "Uncomfortable soldiers are creative soldiers. Creative soldiers are effective soldiers." The former Vextar worlds became laboratories for new forms of civilization. Communities that had once been parts of a collective organism had to learn how to function as societies of individuals. The process was messy, chaotic, and frequently hilarious. Commander Lee Suho established integration centers where ex-Vextar could learn about concepts like privacy, personal property, and disagreement. The classes were taught by humans who understood what it meant to live as individuals in a universe that often made no sense. "Today we're going to talk about arguments," he announced to a class of former bio-warriors. "Arguments are when two people disagree about something, and instead of one of them being wrong, they might both be right from different perspectives." The ex-Vextar students stared at him in confusion. How could two contradictory statements both be true? How could people disagree without one of them being factually incorrect? "This is why humans are so difficult to fight," one student observed. "You don't even agree with each other about what's true." "Exactly," Lee replied. "And that's our greatest strength." The transformation of galactic military doctrine was complete. War colleges across Coalition space taught courses with names like Applied Chaos Theory and Strategic Confusion Methods. Students learned that the best battle plan was often no battle plan at all. General Moon Hyunwoo's Adaptive Warfare School became the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy, despite having no fixed location, no standard curriculum, and no graduation requirements. Students were considered ready when they stopped asking what they were supposed to do and started doing what felt right. Traditional military education taught soldiers to follow orders, he explained to visiting dignitaries. "We teach them to question everything, including our orders." The dignitary, a Centharian peace advocate, looked worried. "But doesn't that lead to anarchy?" "No," Moon replied. "It leads to innovation. Anarchy is chaos without purpose. We practice chaos with direction." As the galaxy adjusted to its new reality, humans found themselves in an unexpected position. They had been called in as a last resort to save civilization, and they had succeeded. But their success had changed the definition of civilization itself. Captain Kim Soo-jin, now promoted to admiral, commanded one of the first mixed-species exploration fleets. Her crew included ex-Vextar navigators who could think in multiple dimensions, Altarian engineers who had learned to build things that worked despite not making sense, and Centharian diplomats who specialized in negotiations where nobody agreed on what they were negotiating about. "Ma'am, we've discovered a new star system," reported her science officer, a young human who had been trained in the art of making accurate observations about things that shouldn't be possible. "Any signs of intelligent life?" Kim asked. "Yes, ma'am. They appear to be highly advanced, very organized, and they follow strict logical principles in everything they do." Kim smiled the kind of smile that had once terrified the Vextar. "Sounds like they could use some help learning how to be unpredictable. Set course for first contact." The galaxy had learned the most important lesson humans had to teach, that sometimes the most advanced thing you could do was admit you didn't know what you were doing and try something new anyway. Former Admiral Kethvar now retired to a quiet, teaching position, often reflected on the day he had first suggested contacting Earth. At the time, he had seen humans as a desperate last resort, primitive warriors who might buy the coalition a few more months before inevitable defeat. Instead, humans had given the galaxy something far more valuable than military victory. They had given it the courage to question its own assumptions, to break its own rules, and to find strength in admitting weakness. The humans taught us that there are no impossible situations, he would tell his students, only insufficient imagination. When you face something that cannot be beaten by traditional methods, the answer isn't better traditional methods. The answer is to stop being traditional. As he looked out at the stars from his classroom window, Kethvar often wondered what other primitive species might be out there, waiting to teach the galaxy new ways to think about old problems. The universe was full of possibilities, and for the first time in galactic history, civilized space was ready to embrace them all, even the ones that made no sense.